Welcome, everyone. How are you? Great to see you here. Thank you all for being here. We're very excited to have Brendon as our presenter tonight. A dear friend and does so much for SPS, and we're very fortunate. And I wanted to invite Kathy up to introduce him officially. My name's Kate, so I'm going to hand it off.
Thank you. Well, I'm excited to introduce Brendon Lund. He is a member of the board on the Sierra Psychedelic Society. He has a background in a degree in philosophy as well as an MBA, which is the perfect combination to be on the board for Sierra Psychedelic Society. He's the treasurer and an integration facilitator, one of our Wednesday night integration facilitators. He's also a gig musician, so you may have seen him around town if you don't know him. And what I love most about Brendon is that he loves to philosophize and talk about consciousness and perceptions of reality and the bounds of reality. So if you ever have a chance on a Wednesday night or a Friday night after these meetings or a Wednesday night after Integration Circle to engage with him, you will be greatly rewarded. I got to do it myself, and it goes deep. But anyway, Brendon's here tonight to talk about his personal transformation with psychedelics. And in addition to his own personal story, he is a facilitator. He assists in facilitating ceremonies. And he's strongly passionate about the use of psychedelics therapeutically, with intention, and when integrated into your life. So I'll let him talk more about that. So help me to welcome Brendon.
And it's his birthday. Happy
Thank you. Thank you for such a warm introduction, Kathy and Kate. I'm honored to be here tonight and to speak in front of all of you regarding some of my personal experience and some of my ideas about life. So with that, let's just get started. So let's start the night by setting a scene. I'm about 15 years old and home from school for the weekend from boarding school. I got my friend's older brother to get us some alcohol. All right, yeah, party time. Now I should mention, this is really one of my first times drinking, and my only reference for how to drink or party is in the movies where, you know, the character basically takes the bottle of booze and slams it back. I should also mention that my friend's brother got us a duffel bag full of about 5 or 6/5 of hard alcohol. So we wait for my parents to go to bed, and I proceed to drink the only way I really know how, like they do in the movies. I remember up to about the point where I want to go on a walk, but I can't seem to figure out how my shoes work. Screw it. The next thing I remember, I'm waking up in the hallway of my house next to the kitchen. My mom's cooking eggs. This isn't good. The whole point of this was to not get caught. Did she know? What was a good excuse I could come up with really quick as to why I passed out in the hallway? What was the last thing oh man, I smell those eggs. It's as if through some sort of motherly clairvoyance, without turning or batting an eye, my mom says, "You hungry?" Oh man, I gotta puke. I would come to find out later from my friends that I did take that walk without my shoes in the dead of winter with about a foot of snow on the ground. I figured my neighbor's house down the street was as good a place as anywhere to take a leak. Proceeded to walk around the neighborhood barefoot, 15 years old, bottle in hand. At some point, toss the bottle down the street, shatters. My friends convinced me at some point to finally head back home. When I get there, I was already getting sick. They bring me into the garage and got me to lay down on a little extra car seat that we had out there. Mind you, they didn't want to get in trouble with my parents either. They also didn't want me to freeze to death, which would probably get them in trouble with my parents. So they were in a conundrum, because it was at or below freezing in that garage, but every time they touched me to try to move me inside, I would let out just a hideous groan. And promptly vomit. Likely on them, or the nearest thing I was aimed at. Somehow, they waited until they could move me and drag me into the hallway, where I would probably get in trouble, but at least I wouldn't die. You know, they say hangovers get worse in your 30s, which is true, but this remains one of the worst of my life. My parents obviously knew. To this day, maybe we can actually clear this up tonight, Dad. To this day, I have no idea if the hangover cure of blended raw eggs and baking soda my dad gave me was actually supposed to make me feel better or to punish me. Dad, any closure on that?
That's all I can think of.
You think that this experience, nearly getting frostbite, getting sicker than I'd ever been in my life, nearly freezing to death in a garage, oh, those eggs, the smell of the eggs, the ones cooking and the ones mixed with the freaking baking soda. You'd think I'd learned that this was not a great way to live. You might think that, but you'd be wrong. I spent the next 20 years of my life figuring out how to get away from that pattern. All right, so now that we're no longer strangers, my name is Brendon Lund. I currently serve on the board of directors for the Sierra Psychedelic Society and facilitate our addiction support circles on the first Wednesday of every month. Also a musician, philosopher, lifelong learner, son, partner. I'm an addict, manic depressive. I'm sensitive, I'm kind-hearted, I'm resilient, I'm insightful. I've also been unkind, thoughtless, I've been careless, I've been callous with people. I am an incomprehensibly beautiful, complex manifestation and expression of the universe's attempt to experience itself through life and love, and pain, and joy, and suffering, and humor, and confusion, and learning, and failure, and successes and growth. And so are each one of you. I'm here today to talk about some of my experiences with addiction and depression and how psychedelics have assisted me on my journey with handling that aspect of myself. So, in lieu of that, I want to provide a few disclaimers. Everything I'm going to share here tonight comes strictly from my perspective, my experience, and my understanding of the world. I give myself license to express my perspective, knowing that it is my perspective, that is all I have or will ever have. And I choose to honor that while realizing there are many, many other interpretations of reality, addiction, and disease. I believe that while an agreed upon objective reality is certainly useful, there are matters of the mind and heart that simply cannot be objective truths. It is as different from one person to the other and as unchangeable as height, eye color, skin color, sexual preference, you name it. And yet, even though our experiences and interpretations of the world are highly subjective, we have an amazing opportunity to understand ourselves more fully by attempting to understand each other. And this can only be accomplished when we express ourselves. Each one of us is a singular and unique, and we each have our own experience to take and our own contributions to give. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a licensed therapist, not a shaman or a spirit guide, I don't claim to be. I don't have a degree in substance abuse or any other qualifications other than my personal experience. To be fully honest, I've had some reservations about speaking here tonight about such a serious topic, something that affects people so personally and so deeply. topic that so many have studied and go through extensive training to help people with. But also, to be honest, I've dealt with many of these professionals as a patient and as a client, and a lot of times I haven't felt heard or helped. I'm just a person, one who has struggled, as many of us do, with the complexities and pitfalls of life. This has led me down a path of study, experimentation, introspection, and more, about how to live a better life, how to improve my thoughts and my circumstances, and how to feel better about this absurd situation we all find ourselves in called life. We're all just trying to figure this out the best we can. From the most highly trained professionals who do seem to have it figured all out, to the people who are confused and struggling with addiction and depression and their place in this life. After all is said and done, what I have, all I truly have, is my experience. And that's what I want to share. I trust that those who invited me to speak here tonight saw something about my experience and my way of sharing that warranted giving me a platform to speak on this subject. And if even a part of this experience or an idea that I share here tonight resonates with anyone who hears it, or helps someone gain perspective or insight into their own experience, that would be the highest honor I could receive. It would make my sharing public. Second, as a disclaimer, even though I have personally found some sort of answer or relief in the use of psychedelics, this may not and will not be everyone's path. I'm not proposing this is some sort of magic bullet, nor that it's the only way to treat addictive or depressive tendencies or behaviors. Addiction and depression are freaking hard. They're singular and unique to each person's experience. What works for one person or even a segment of people may not work for all the others, which is why there's no cookie cutter answer, no cure that works for everyone. Why even all the training in the world may fall short of helping people out of this. Why certain programs can help some and not others. I know that a traditional path to recovery didn't work for me. I respect and appreciate that it does work for some and even a lot of people. It just didn't work for me. This was a path that I discovered through experimentation, openness, and guidance that worked for me after trying many, many other paths that were unsuccessful, including talk therapy, psychotherapy, medication, abstinence, and more, just to name a few. Addiction is a complex and personal issue that can stem from a variety of root causes and have different levels of complexity and severity for each individual. Maybe my experience isn't as bad as some others, maybe it's worse than some others. That's not what I'm here to determine in this life or in this room. I'm just here to share my experience. Maybe in the end, sharing our experience, identifying with others, and allowing ourselves some grace can be one of the most powerful steps on the road to recovery, knowing that we're not alone. We can tend to be closed off to one another, and just knowing that someone else can identify with how you feel or what you're going through, powerful. I've seen that so much in our circles. Finally, I really don't have any answers. I seek only to ask the right questions. For an answer to the wrong question is kind of useless. It sort of reminds me of 42. What's the answer to life, the universe, and everything? 42. We obviously didn't understand the question. We can't understand the answer. Many talks will try to present an answer or the answer to some problem. They're treated like products that will fix a pain point. My experience in my life is not a product I'm trying to sell. Your experience, your life is worth more than to buy someone else's answer. Beware of those who claim to have answers, especially those who would claim to have yours. Again, in order to have an appropriate answer, we must understand the question. Each of us, in our own experiences, constitute the question. No one can possibly understand your experience, your question, since you are the only one who could possibly have it. Someone claims to have your answer, beware. How are we doing so far? Alright, so those are a few things I just wanted to kind of like clear the board on before I started in. There's a few concepts that I'd like to discuss as well before getting to our main topic tonight. These are concepts I've either learned through school, extracurricular studies, my upbringing. Many of my dads started implanting in my thoughts at a fairly young age. Thank you, Dad. And they've been incredibly helpful in understanding my journey and my place in this reality. First one that I'd like to speak on is the concept of both and versus either or. One of the most difficult things for the human mind to do is to hold two opposing thoughts in the mind simultaneously. Our minds like to compartmentalize and don't like it when things are ambiguous, let alone like directly opposing each other. In the philosophical discipline of symbolic logic, and to a certain extent set theory, this can be visualized as a distinction between A or not A, as in it's either raining outside or it's not, and it can't be both. That's taken as a given in most of our logical thinking. I refer to it as an either-or mentality. Let's just take a simple example. An object that I'm holding, how about this phone? I think most of us agree that this thing here is a thing. I was gonna have a cup. Hey, I have a cup. You know, I can actually use the thing. I think it's a cup. I can touch it, I can knock on it, I can break it, I won't. I can drink from it, I can try to eat it. I can use it for its intended purpose. I mean, if I know what that is. I can be creative and use it for a purpose it wasn't intended for. However, is it even really here? The atoms that make up this object are more than 99.99% empty space. I mean, in all reality, it's more not here than it is here. Even most of the parts that are here are just electrical charges. Just try to drink the microphone. And would anybody even be able to tell me what the not here part is? Yeah, it's empty space, but what is empty space made out of? Nothingness? What is that? What makes up nothing? What makes space space? Furthermore, this cup literally only exists to me as stimuli and impulses in my brain. When we observe the outside world, what we're actually observing is the internal world of our mind. So does this cup exist out here or in here? Okay, this stuff, I mean, it boggles my mind, and I'd love to think about it, but it is actually important. It's important. The important part is what we think we understand and what we perceive. I know that this is a cup, even if it's vastly more not a cup than it is a cup. And even if I don't know what the part that's not a cup is that makes up most of the cup that is, and even if I don't know if the cup exists outside of me or within me, I can still call it a cup and use it as one and drink water from it, which makes it possible to keep observing the cup because my body doesn't die from dehydration. It's useful. And it's both something and nothing. It's not either or. It's both of those things. The reason I bring this up is because many times we define a thing or ourselves without really thinking too much about it. It's second nature to make snap judgments about things based on our perception or conditioning. Usually the mundane things like a cup, but sometimes much deeper things. If I see myself as an addict or worthless, I'll fill that role. I'll I'll fill the role of what I define myself as. But if I look a little closer, there are many areas of my life, times in my life, even though I was an alcoholic, even though I was having suicidal thoughts, that I was also not an alcoholic. I wasn't always drunk, even if that was most of the time. Or maybe my time as an addict or in the grips of depression was instead myself learning how not to be. Maybe that was a necessary part of my journey of becoming the not. Both and, not either or. And this allows me to appreciate the parts of me that help me to find me. My addiction, my depression weren't either good or bad. They were both good and bad. It was hard, it was painful. It was also fun sometimes. Sometimes served me. Also eventually drove me pretty crazy. But it was absolutely essential and necessary for me to find the person I could become because of those things. Finally, it is a deeply held belief of mine that it's polarity that gives things meaning. It's difference that bestows meaning. I first really started contemplating this with music. I wouldn't know harmony if it weren't for dissonance. Harmony wouldn't be beautiful without dissonance to weigh it against. People say, a lot of musicians say, it's the notes you don't play. That couldn't be more true. If you played all the notes at once, it would be just cacophonous and dissonant. It's the space and the distance between that engender the melody. This is what gives music meaning. It's what gives individual notes meaning in a larger context. It's what makes a beautiful melody. It's precisely because of the darkness of my addiction and depression that I'm truly able to experience the beauty and light of my life outside of it. The low notes accent the higher ones. Truly thankful for the person I had to be to become the person that I am. Even if that person was full of self-loathing, made embarrassing mistakes, allowed me to become who I am today. And there will inevitably be more low notes waiting for me. But I know that melody will be beautiful to behold. Moving on, the next concept I want to kind of bring attention to is called a pattern interrupt. So, I see addiction as a pattern, a loop that we get caught in. Depression as a loop that we get caught in. These loops playing in my mind. You're not good enough. You should just end it. You should have a drink. Maybe that would give you the courage to. So I want to look at patterns. Patterns and cycles are an inherent part of our life, from the cycle of our days to months, and seasons, and years. Cycles of love and grief, prosperity and loss, to the ultimate cycle of this life that we have to live from birth to death. Cycles are created from the repetition of patterns. We can be so used to the cycles and patterns of life, it may not even occur to us that they are patterns. Getting up, going to work, hanging out with friends, choosing to connect with people or withdraw from the world. None are inherently good or bad, they just kind of stack. This is inevitable. Patterns stack on each other. think they're fractal. I think if you look at what a fractal is, it's more than just a pretty pattern, or what you see when you go on a journey. It's a repeating pattern, one that repeats itself infinitely as you zoom in or out. The larger patterns created by the smaller patterns. The smaller patterns in our life are created by the choices that we make in every moment. And that's why they're so vital. Because the larger patterns in our life and the larger cycles in our life, the ones that span the scope of months and years, the ones that many of us believe provide meaning, will inevitably mirror those smaller patterns we choose to make in every seemingly mundane moment. And this is why creating an intentional and conscious pattern is so important. We want to keep repeating the unconscious choices we make because we're too busy to think about what we want or could have in our life? Or do we want to try and create something that we intend to create? Neither are inherently good or bad. It's a question that we have to answer for ourselves. I just know that I got to a point where the patterns I was unconsciously creating were producing toxicity in my life. They were becoming harmful to me and those around me. To the people that I love, that was almost worse than me. I no longer wanted that. I no longer wanted my unintended choices to be a source of pain for myself or others. I started to see a larger picture forming from these choices I was making, and one that I didn't want to be the story of my life. So how do we change a pattern? This is where the pattern interrupt comes in. How do we move from an old pattern to a new pattern if we're not happy with the pattern that we're cycling? From an unconscious pattern to a conscious or an intentional one. Patterns and cycles have a way of creating gravity and gathering momentum as we repeat them and repeat them. And it can be incredibly difficult to shake a pattern or cycle once we've been repeating it for a long time. The good news with that is that if we can somehow break out of the old pattern and start a new one, even with small steps, those steps start to create a cycle that starts to gain its own momentum and eventually its own gravity. For me, the example is exercise. I've always loved the way exercise makes me feel, even when I find it so hard just to get to that first push-up. But it was impossible if I was hungover, and I'd never start, let alone try to make a routine or a practice out of it. And while I was stuck in that old pattern, it was next to impossible to start a new one. There's just no space for a new pattern when you're repeating the old one. So it helps to make a new pattern concurrent with breaking an old one. It's best to replace a broken pattern with a new one. So yeah, I would start with something very easy, just a few push-ups, sit-ups. That little bit of exercise made me feel a little bit better, both in my mind and my body. I started looking forward to the thing that made me feel better, the exercise. Then I would exercise and it would make me feel better. Then I would look forward to feeling even better. And obviously there's a plateau here, and in all honesty, exercise can be just as unhealthy an addiction or pattern as anything else. You just have to be aware of whether it's starting to create negative outcomes in our life. So, long way around, what does this have to do with pattern interrupts? Pattern interrupt is something that my dad taught me when I was young, and it's a concept that actually comes from NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. There's many aspects of NLP that were discredited, but I think the pattern interrupt is still a useful tool. It has to do with introducing a sudden change in order to shock our system out of repeating the pattern. A simple example would be that if you're constantly like hitting the snooze button multiple times when you're trying to wake up in the morning, consistently like sleeping an hour past your alarm because you keep hitting the snooze button, you can move the alarm across the room. So you actually have to get up and walk over to turn it off. So I have a couple salient examples of pattern interrupts in my life. I used to work at Whole Foods, and one day a lady came into the store, and she was just looking for a fight. Nothing. She wanted someone who worked there, and I don't know if anybody has been to Whole Foods here, but the customer service there is pretty dang good, and you can pretty much say whatever you want to an employee, and that is kind of most of America, to be honest. I mean, people take out a lot of their stuff on service workers. So she came in and she was giving me hell about some of our products and kind of goading me. There's nothing I could say that would get her to stop trying to escalate the situation, and eventually I just said, "Is everything okay? Everything okay?" Her husband had died the previous week. She told me that. And you just never know what's going on in somebody's life. Like, that was her way of coping. She wanted to fight. She wanted to take that anger out. But it just took somebody not buying into the game to keep repeating that cycle of anger. So that's shocking the system out of repeating that cycle that we want to escalate. Another example where this was a personal example where I was getting off a show from Buster Blue, and we got done playing. I went to the gas station just to pick up a few things, pick up cigarettes on my way home. I hadn't been drinking that night, thank goodness, because I went into the store, and as I was walking out, some guy was peeing on my car, intentionally, on the door handle. I was like, man, I've had a long night. I just don't want to deal with this. He was like, hey man, if you got a problem, right over there. And he walked around the corner. You know what? Like, no, I'm not dealing with this. I want to go back into the 7-Eleven. Went back in. I asked the guy. I was like, man, this guy just peed on my car. You have a rag and some cleaner? He was like, man, I would go kick that guy's ass. Yeah, I'm just not the kind of person, and I'm just not into it. So I go back out, I clean my car up. 30 seconds later, about 15 guys came up from around the corner in the back of their trucks. So he was trying to get me back there. Trying to play on my pattern to get angry, to go after him. That's a dangerous situation. I didn't even know it. I got out of something that could have been really bad that night. And that was a pattern interrupt in my own mind. Don't get mad. Don't try to beat this guy up. Whatever. Yeah, fun stuff. Yeah, and I've seen pattern interrupts. They enter our life in many forms. A lot of times it's pretty big life events. I've seen alcoholics shocked out of their routine by getting a DUI, getting arrested, getting fired from a job, landing yourself in the hospital. I've seen it in other ways, losing a loved one, going through a bad breakup. Also seen in psychedelic journeys. It's a way to shock the system. It's a way to shake things up a little bit, introduce some entropy. So I want to talk a little bit about pattern and habit forming, the neuroscience of it, and Kate had a wonderful talk on this, and we have it, is it on the Slack channel?
It's on the YouTube channel.
Perfect.
And linked to the website.
Awesome. So just a wealth of information on the neuroscience of psychedelics, and Kate did a wonderful job with that. I found there's a concept called long-term potentiation, which is a neurological process that creates neural pathways that become entrained and easier to access over time. And while these pathways become easier to access, other ones become more difficult. That's why it's easy to repeat habits and patterns that we've been doing for a long time. Our brains are literally trained to do it. Even when those habits create negative outcomes for us, we're literally wired to be more comfortable making those decisions. Making that comfortable decision is the path of least resistance in our brain. It's what's easiest. It becomes harder and harder to resist making that decision over time. That's how patterns gain momentum. They become the easy choice for a brain to make. And the smaller choices end up becoming and creating the larger cycles that we live. And there's also, so there's that, and there's also the flip side of that coin, which is depotentiation. It's possible to retrain your brain. We found in recent years that neuroplasticity is still very possible as we age. Neuroplasticity is simply the ability for your brain to create new connections and new pathways. In creating and using new pathways, we can depotentiate the entrained ones. The less we fall back on their use by using other pathways, the less pull they have as a default. And one of the ways to create new connections is just to allow the possibility of them, to open up the options. And one way to do this is to introduce entropy into the system. And I still just love the analogy of the sledding hill. And I think was that originally Paul Stamets, or was that?
Paulin quotes somebody else whose name I can't remember about that metaphor.
Okay. It's a wonderful analogy, and I'll share it here tonight. It's not mine, and I couldn't find who it was either. But if you were to go sledding on a freshly snowed upon hill, our first choice of where to go down and sled would create a groove in the snow. And the more we went down that same path, the more entrenched that groove would become. Eventually, no matter which direction you attempted to sled down the hill, the contours of the snow and gravity would just pull you back into that path. Entropy is like snow falling again. And with a fresh snow, you can choose to go down the hill any direction that you please. Psychedelics have been shown to actually create entropy in our brain, and this allows us the opportunity, should we choose to use it, to create these new pathways. And I've always grown like mind-expanding substances. Well, literally mind-expanding substances. They create the entropy which will allow us to go in a different direction. So I'd like to get a little bit more into addiction, and I'm going through a lot of this stuff kind of before I get into my story, just to clarify some terms and to think about some things. I think that was something in my philosophy degree that was always a very basic thing, was like, what exactly are we talking about? Let's define our terms, because we can be using the same words but not meaning the same thing. And that can be confusing and sometimes dangerous. So I want to try and define addiction for our use tonight. I feel like we can throw around words like addiction with the preconception or misconception that we all derive the same meaning. So I don't know, like, Anyone want to throw out a definition of their addiction?
Are you serious?
Yeah, you just raise your hand.
Definition of addiction?
Yeah.
I believe it's a substance or behavior that you want to stop and cannot, and it has a negative effect on your life.
Very nice. Yes, please.
Search for self.
Search for self. That's interesting. I like that. Yeah.
Let's say chaos and confusion,
Chaos and confusion.
entrapment, imprisonment.
That's definitely how it felt. Yeah. Feels how it can feel.
Protection.
Protection.
What's out there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I like staying with what you're comfortable with.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
A gradual narrowing of things that give you pleasure. It's a Huberman reference
Yeah.
of other things that give you pleasure, not the addiction.
Yeah, as we focus in on the one thing that creates that pleasure, the other things don't create as much pleasure, and we just kind of. Oh yeah.
Patterns or behaviors that create a wall between you and love, self-love.
Self-love.
Coping mechanism and escape.
Coping mechanism and escape.
Say that learned compulsion.
Learned compulsion. Yeah, all of these. Yeah, I mean, and I think I said earlier on in the talk, like addiction is many things to many people, and it has as many definitions as there are people, because we all have, well, not we all, but like many people have, and yeah, we all kind of have something with addiction. I mean, it is something. It may not be heroin, but we're all addicted to something, and we have been at some point in our life. So DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, has a chapter on substance-related addictive orders. They mainly focus on substance abuse or substance use disorders when classifying addiction. They list 9 types of substance addiction: alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids, sedatives, hypnotics, and anxiolytics, stimulants, and tobacco. This new edition actually added gambling, which isn't a substance use disorder, but could be. Personally, I gravitate more toward the WHO. It's the Internal Classification of Disease. And they provide an additional section on obsessive compulsive and related disorders with categorization of behavioral addictions. And they are classified as impulse control disorders, broadly defined as repeated failure to resist an impulse, drive, or urge to perform an act that is rewarding to the person, at least in the short term, despite longer-term harm, either to the individual or others. That definition includes more behavioral patterns, which I think should be included in addiction. So I think one of the most important ideas in those categories to me is the negative and harmful or unwanted consequences caused by the use or engagement in that behavior. For me, at least for tonight, I would like to use addiction as the inability to refrain from the intense urge to engage in a particular behavior pattern despite negative, harmful, or unwanted consequences elicited by the engagement in the behavior. I think the harmful consequences are really important in that, and the inability to refrain as perceived by the engager. So that includes chemical addictions, but also behavioral addictions, compulsive shopping, internet use, which has become much more prevalent in recent years. Can include pornography, video games, attention-seeking behavior, risk-seeking behavior, even exercise, work. I think we can even include depression, anger, suicidal ideation, other thought patterns. There's compulsive thought patterns in that list. Even though they're not physical behaviors, they're still mental patterns and mental behaviors that seem to fit into that classification. For me, depression and suicidal ideation became a particularly harmful cycle that I wanted to stop but couldn't. Loop. Others experience uncontrollable or excessive anger, anxiety. So on my path, those two forms of addiction were prevalent. And quick note, like on this quote unquote severity of my story, for a long time, I didn't think my story was like severe enough to warrant a discussion. And man, what a disservice and a devaluation of myself and my experience. I mean, we're perpetually inundated with just incredibly profound, sometimes horrifyingly tragic stories that people have survived and found ways to flourish through. And it's one of the great things about the internet, but it's also one of the things that, like, you see the pinnacle of what this can be. It's like, man, I can't believe that guy made it through this, and that's wild. My story doesn't matter as much as that. Why should I share my story? Those stories are inspiring, and I give so much reverence and respect and appreciation for the people who've lived and survived and shared these stories, but that doesn't mean that just because you weren't once a heroin addict on the street and experienced crazy trauma in your life that your story doesn't matter. Your story matters, my story matters, most of all to the person living it. You've been hurt. It doesn't matter how much that hurt will create response. You've experienced challenges and you made it through them. You freaking made it through them. It doesn't matter if it seems like they were less or more challenging than someone else's. Being able to honor our story is the first step to acceptance and healing. It's the story of who we are. Through that, it's the story of who we were, and through that, who we came to be. We can't learn to honor who we were and where we come from. How can we honor where we are? It took me a long time to accept or even love who I was, even in my darkest moments. But I do because it allowed me to become who I am. And with that, let's get into some dark moments. Remembering that I honor and love each of them for what they taught me and who they allowed me to be. My journey with substance use disorders started when I was probably about 15 with the story I shared at the beginning of this talk. At this point, I tried smoking marijuana, but it wasn't and really never became what I would classify as an addiction, as we were talking about earlier, i.e. the inability to refrain paired with the negative consequences. My main substance use disorder in my life has been alcohol. I don't know if that came up through family history or paired with the depression. They kind of just certainly some standout stories. Tried to befriend a bear in Mammoth. Saw him across the parking lot. I was like, "Oh, you are awesome. Come here." He didn't. Lucky for me, I guess. We, as Kathy mentioned, I'm a gigging musician. We were on tour in Moscow, Idaho. After a particularly emotional and drunk night, I was walking back to the place that we were staying, and there was about 3 feet of snow on the ground. It was about 20 degrees out, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna lay down right here. I don't really know what I was thinking in that moment. Maybe I didn't want to keep going. Maybe that was my way of quitting. I was able to quit alcohol a few times, the most significant being for about 3 years after that incident. That incident scared me. I mean, what are you trying to do? Started to pass out, and I felt my hands going numb, and I was like, you gotta get up right now. You're not gonna make it through the night. So that was a shocker. I woke up. That also ended up having some pretty that night it had a damaging effect on the band I was touring with. And I mean, not only did I almost end my life, I ruined a big part of it. So that was the first moment I was like, I gotta do something about this. That attempt started with seeing a therapist pretty consistently, which was helpful with talk therapy, and she was able to clarify some things for me that helped. She mentioned that the alcohol was creating a bipolar response in me. I would get really high, really good, and then crash, really down, really bad. It's almost like a substance-induced bipolar. Super manic when I'm drinking, super depressed when I'm not. It's also required to see a psychiatrist who prescribed me with antidepressants. And that was terrible. Not being able to feel anything was rough. I've almost never wanted to. I've never had more suicidal ideation than that, because it was just like, I'm not going to feel anything ever again. Then screw this. I asked the psychiatrist, when am I going to be able to get off these antidepressants? And he was basically like, you're on them indefinitely. The psychiatrist was also flat as a board. I think he was higher than his mustache. The tricky thing about abstinence and quitting is eventually I think you have control over the situation. After about 3 years, I started getting into the same kind of situations that I was in before, and I'd be like, no, I haven't had a drink for 3 years. What's one? It's not gonna hurt. I can control myself now. I haven't had one in 3 years. I had one tonight, and then I did. That was the tricky part. I had one. I was like, see, I can do it. do it. And the next time, I have 2. That's not bad. I can do this. I'm good. But insidious, man. About a month down the road, before I knew it, I was back. I was back, baby. Somehow this time I was able to get cocaine in the mix. That was, made it, it just magnified it. Cocaine magnifies everything, I think. And let's talk about shame with that. I never had shame when I was drinking before. Like when I was drinking up until that first time quitting, it was cool. I was like, be proud of how much you drank. After I quit, and I put all that time and effort into quitting, and like realizing I was back in the same spot, I felt a great deal of shame. Every time that I drank, I experienced shame with it. Shame ended up becoming a catalyst to increasing that cycle. I would drink, feel the shame of having worked so hard to quit for so many years, just going down the drain. Drink more to numb that shame and guilt. Shame can be a dangerous cycle. That's where like grace comes in. Allow yourself some grace. Human, we make mistakes. We're not infallible. So I fell into that cycle for about 2 to 3 years again. And then the pandemic hit. I mean, kind of a blessing on that one. I got lucky. Couldn't get cocaine anymore, so I was able to detox from that and remove myself from that cycle at least for long enough to be like, wow, that was rough. But it didn't do much for my drinking. That became untenable during the pandemic. Like, we had nothing to do. I just started drinking the moment I got up. It's just wasted by like 3 p.m. every day. Gained a good 20 pounds. Mixed with the stagnancy of not being able to go anywhere and do anything, I started to struggle with my depression more than I really ever had. So let's talk about that, the depression. And I've suffered with that throughout my life since teenager. And I think kind of think the depression started in the hope for change. I was a bit of a wild kid. Problem with authority. I wanted to see the world change, and when I didn't, when I couldn't, it became, I don't know, just couldn't deal with that. But the depression was just compounded by the substance abuse, and I hated myself when I believed that I was worthless. I didn't believe I was worthy of the food that I was eating, the space I was taking up in this world. Those thoughts would just relentlessly repeat themselves in my head. You're worthless. You don't deserve to be alive. You don't deserve love. You don't deserve to feel good. You don't deserve to eat today. You don't deserve friends. You don't deserve this life. Worthless, worthless, worthless. Piece of shit. Kill yourself. Kill yourself. Stop wasting the resources of good people who deserve to be here and just kill yourself. You're selfish by not doing it. You're a piece of shit for not killing yourself. Got to the point I would hope the drugs or drinking would kill me. That when I was in the midst of a bender, that I would be distraught and careless enough to do it. Oh, Reno, gambling. I learned that lesson young. I mean, like, I had one night where I had just gotten out of a breakup and I lost a ton of money at the tables and just ranked myself stupid. And this was when they were building the train trench downtown. And I blacked out. When I came to, I was standing at the edge. I mean, they had it fenced off. It was still a construction zone, but it was like a 30-foot drop down to the cement. Now, what was I doing there? Why did my brain bring me there? I had to climb a 12-foot fence to get in there. My hands were bloody. Again, middle of winter. I don't know why I do this when it's freaking 10 degrees outside. I mean, yeah, like I feel like I was ready to throw myself in. I was able to get a hold of some friends who picked me up and were able to take me to the hospital. And even then, I mean, you'd think I'd see I had a problem, but no. Still early in my journey, I still had a long way to go. So yeah, these issues compounded each other. Depression would lead to drinking, drinking would lead to depression, which would lead to drinking, to deeper depression, to more drinking, riskier behavior. Because like, I wanted to die. I would become more upset at myself for being too scared to do it, leading me deeper down the spiral. It's still crazy to me. Like, I think finding out how long it takes the body to process alcohol is wild. 2 weeks for females, 1 week for men. So I mean, like, I was drinking every day, every other day. I don't think there was a single day for years of my life that I wasn't hungover, that I hadn't processed all the alcohol out of my body. So I'm gonna like to get into my experience with psychedelics. I'm gonna break this into two sections. One's recreational and the other is the therapeutic experience. My experience with psychedelics in general, recreationally, happened in my high school years. Thank you, Dare. You made it sound so awesome. My first experience with psychedelics was truly profound and completely changed my understanding of the universe and my place within it. They allowed me to see in a personal and very vivid experience that there was no real separation between anything. I looked at my arm and I was like, there's nothing between my arm and the air. Like, they're just their energy flowing together. The whole universe was connected. I realized the boundaries we placed on the world were just constructs of our mind. The boundaries between countries and states, cities and nature, the boundaries we placed between our home and the outside world, our property to the sidewalk to the road. I could see that it was just the universe, it was just space. We put those there. I mean, they have a purpose to allow us to functionally interact with the world, but they don't actually exist. I was able to take that one step further and realize that there was no boundary between myself and the rest of the world. Boundaries between my skin and the air are just a shift in the vibrational energy and the density of the fabric of the universe. I felt connected to it and as an inextricable part of it. It's interesting when I think back to doing psychedelics at that time in my life, because even then I could see how they made me want to honor myself more. I would get to the end of an LSD trip, man, and be like, man, I gotta quit smoking. Like, I'm scared of what this is gonna do to me. I shouldn't have the language, skills, or knowledge of how powerful those notions could be at the time. It'd take another 20 years before I did. Even in those times, I felt a powerful draw to those psychedelics. I loved them more than I liked marijuana or alcohol or any other substance. I felt like I was incredibly sensitive to them. Like, it didn't take much to get me to feel them. even now, I can think about, like, I can just be like, I'm gonna do mushrooms later today, and I'm like, oh, wow, the universe has changed. I always said that I'm just close to the gates, and all I just need is a little push. But they weren't easy to come by, and I went into my college years, I began doing what was more readily available, more socially acceptable, and that was the drinking. It's just wild to me how accepted it is, and how many people have a problem with it, and how, like, how did I ever think that that was cool? And I don't know, I feel like an old man now. But like, there's so much better things. Like, why that? Why do the thing that's just like, you black out anyway and do stupid stuff? All right. So about 6 months into the pandemic, the drinking had reached a point where I was just untenable. I was drinking more often and more consistently, earlier in the day with more depressive results than I had experienced, and that's when I decided I just had enough. I met an incredible person who was on a similar path and wanting to be healthier and happier and was struggling with some of the same tendencies. She asked me if I was curious about attending a psychedelic ceremony with a substance I had never heard of before, which is bufo. For those of you who don't know, bufo is a secretion of what's known as the Sonoran desert toad, or the Colorado river toad. Latin name is Bufo alvarius, and the main component is 5-MeO-DMT. I can try my best to describe this experience, but I wanted to focus on a tenet of the experience that was just as, if not more important than the experience of the substance itself, and that was the ceremonial, the medicinal aspect of the experience. I had never even heard of preparing mentally and physically for a psychedelic experience for the duration of like 2 weeks to a month. Diet and exercise, preparing my body, preparing my mind through meditation and intention setting. I hadn't been introduced to the concept of following through after a ceremony with the integration process and integration practices. The concept of a psychedelic substance being medicinal was completely foreign to me. I remember hearing people refer to it as medicine. I was just like, okay, whatever makes you feel better about doing drugs, buddy, let's go. I couldn't have been more wrong. Like that, this medicine has helped me more than anything I've experienced in life, more than therapy, more than pharmaceuticals. There's a wonderful resource on the SPS Slack channel about regarding preparation, intention setting, set and setting, integration, the integration guide. It's a wonderful guide, and it's a wonderful resource for those of you interested in looking at that process more.
Being true to you, it's called.
What was that?
It's called being true to you.
Being true to you.
Yeah.
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 And just as a brief overview of this, the first step in this cycle, of this therapeutic psychedelic cycle, is intention setting, and that's where we state, usually write down, meditate on, envision an intention or a change we'd like to make in our life. It can be as simple as, I don't want addiction to rule my life anymore. I no longer want to feel worthless. I want to see abundance in my life. And these are just a few examples that I've used in my personal intention setting. The next step is the journey. It's finding a journey guide that you trust to help you create a beneficial set and setting and to guide you through the journey and the experience. Experiencing the journey, setting aside expectations and allowing yourself to experience it. There's a wonderful section on that guide about expectation versus intention, because freeing yourself from the expectations but also being able to set intentions it's similar but very different. The final step, and the most important in my experience, is integration. It's where you take the lessons from the journey and apply them to our everyday lives through intentional practice. Through addiction, like focus has been a big thing on my mind. It's been very helpful to think about, like, where's my focus? Is my focus not drinking? If my focus is simply abstinence, like not drinking, don't drink, my focus is still on the drinking. By focusing on negating behavior, on negating the behavior, my focus is still on the behavior. It's still on the alcohol. I'm like, don't drink. Something psychedelics have really helped me with is truly learning to focus away from the alcohol and depression. Show me a true focus on how good I feel and how it really feels to feel good. It feels good to feel good. Every day I wake up and my first thought is just like how good I feel and how productive I can be. A better version of myself every day. Makes me feel good about myself and the things I'm doing. I can go to work and I can enjoy each moment. It helps me, I feel it helps to have the 2 times that I've quit drinking to compare each other. The first time, I was proud of myself, but I was still pretty depressed. This was because I was abstaining from the thing that I actually wanted, the thing that seemed to make life worth living, that I just couldn't do anymore. Through the journey with psychedelics, I found that I can truly value and get excited about the things I get to do now that I don't drink. I'm truly excited to move forward every day instead of missing my vice like a lost love. My first Bufo experience, where to start, man? Like, the whole thing, the first thing I want to say is it would be impossible to put the experience into words. Anything I would say would fall so drastically short of the experience. I could explain the physicality of the experience or being blasted out into unity consciousness or of awareness without the filter of the senses. I could describe the abject terror or beauty of it all. Like in dreams, you really sink into an emotion. In dreams, I felt more love than I've ever been able to feel awake. More fear, more anger, more sadness. I try to explain, it was like all of that, but just times a million. I don't think it can be adequately conveyed. The effect of the experience, however, when I came back, I was like stuffed back into my corporeal body. I felt a gratitude I hadn't felt before. I couldn't help but feel just so much love for this world and this experience and this self. I came back and I just started crying. I wept. I wept so hard for the love and the beauty and the pain and the sorrow of this world. I mean, each thing just more beautiful than the last. Even the bad things. I wept for every moment that I had just the honor of experiencing. It's an honor to experience this. We're so lucky. Every moment, good and bad, it's mine. It's only mine. It's mine to have. It's mine to hold. No one gets to have my experience but me. I mean, how fucking special is that? How sacred is that? I'm the only one who gets to experience this experience. I wept for the child that I was and the uncertainty he felt. I wept for the man I had become, who was so hurt by this world that he felt like he had no choice but to numb himself and try to escape from it. Turning to thoughts of ending it just to escape that pain. I wept at myself for the selfishness of taking this all for granted. How could I have ever taken something so unique and special for granted? How selfish. But even with that came gratitude, and I was just so happy that I could see it now. I saw my life for this first time as this beautiful, impossible gift given only to me. Only me. No one else can hold it. I wanted to fucking throw it out. Numb it, block it, dim its light. It's the most thoughtful and heartfelt gift from the person that I love the most. I thought of it like this gift that I received from somebody I loved, and I wanted to throw it out. It hurt my heart. I vowed to myself I would never take this life for granted again. Ever. I was going to have good experiences, and I would have bad experiences, and I was going to live and feel every one of them to the fullest because they're mine. It's my life. I get to feel it. I'm the only one who ever gets to. I just felt that so deep in my soul. A lot of people report feeling reborn after Google, and I can certainly say the same. I don't believe that I really truly lived until that moment, and at least not since I was a child and still saw the wonder and magic of every new moment and experience. Just like every experience we have, now that I had it, I couldn't take it back. In my old life, I wanted to die. Maybe a part of me did that day. It might sound like it was the medicine talking when I was in that state, but I still feel just as strongly years later. Because honestly, it was just a perspective shift. It was a pattern that was interrupted. I woke from a bad dream and found it had been a good one all along. I just couldn't see it. Couldn't appreciate that. This is an important piece. It wasn't the medicine, it's my mind. That medicine helped me unlock something within myself. A true, deep perspective shift. Something far more than the experience itself. This perspective shift goes with me the rest of my life. I don't need the medicine for that. I am the gift. I'm the gift it gave me. It gave me me. Integration is a huge part of this experience. It took me weeks, months to integrate this. I saw a huge shift in my patterns and practices. Felt as though I was doing the smallest things with intention and appreciation. That appreciation you have when you know that you're really the only one who gets to experience and appreciate it. I feel so grateful for finding this path when I needed it, for finding the perspective shift, for having the honor to be introduced to these medicines as medicines, as therapy. My gratitude is just never ending. Can't believe how lucky I am to be standing with you guys today, being able to share this. The experience broke my brain, but it broke something that needed to be broken so that I could go about putting it back together. As I said before, a lot of studies have shown one of the primary benefits of psychedelics is that they introduce entropy into our neurological system. This creates new opportunities for neuroplasticity. There's a critical neuroplasticity window for about 2 weeks following a large dose of psychedelics. This is why that integration process following a psychedelic journey is so critical and can be so powerful. It integrates the experience into practice. Recurring practice of the learned experience forms new patterns, which become habits, which become new cycles. Again, the talk on the neuroscience of psychedelics, if you want to go deeper into that, is a great resource. So, remember the cup? Talked about how it was actually more not a cup than it was a cup. Yet the 0.01% of it that is a cup is patterned in such a way to give it the form of a cup. These patterns don't really take much, just a little bit here and there, an atom here, atom there, arranged in the right way. That 0.01 of a cup can become a cup, and that little bit here and there allows me to fill my cup and to have a cup to fill. I also spoke of the pattern interrupt and how it's nearly impossible to start a new pattern while the old one is still cycling. Something I received in my journey that was both terrifying and empowering is that in the present moment there is no pattern. The pattern is perpetuating itself, yes, but there's no inherent pattern in each moment. It was like the ground beneath me just vanished. The thing I was so used to holding me up and supporting me just fell away. But with this realization that there was no pattern came power. It showed me that choice is our ultimate power. We have the power to choose any pattern we want. I had just become too complacent, comfortable, and even too lazy to change that pattern. It was a core part of my issue. I was comfortable in the pattern, even if the pattern was harmful. Even if I didn't want to subscribe to that cycle anymore, I was more comfortable thinking I was worthless than thinking that I had any sort of power. It took shocking my brain out of this pattern, which was uncomfortable and frankly terrifying. And by interrupting this pattern, by blasting my brain into the cosmos and breaking the structure I had created, it gave me a chance, even if for a moment, to create something different. I had to be prepared to take advantage of that opportunity, though. To take advantage of it with intention. I've had plenty of psychedelic experiences that yield no overall change in my behavior. But I just hadn't intended to change my behavior at the outset. Without intention, there was nothing to change and nothing to integrate. With my intention and a pattern interrupt, I could take the advantage of the temporary entropy to create the new pattern. Then I could integrate it by creating a practice of thinking in the form of a new pattern. And this is why integration is so important. It allows us to cement that new pattern into an actual behavioral practice. This becomes self-perpetuating, as we've seen in the way cycles tend to gather momentum and eventually gravity. So yeah, to sum it up, the therapeutic psychedelic experience is bringing intention into a pattern interrupt that allows us to leverage that pattern vacuum created by the interrupt by replacing the previous pattern with intentional choice. We cement that pattern through practice. And as we cycle through the new pattern, it creates its own momentum and gravity. And that's the integration process. There's one last aside. That psychedelics in and of themselves have the potential to create their own pattern. That people express that they're worried about getting addicted to psychedelics. I don't necessarily think that fear is unfounded. I mean, I love them and I would do them every week if it weren't so terrifying, but still for the for the benefits, it's not. I don't think that fear is unfounded. I personally believe there are some who use psychedelics recreationally far too often to engender the therapeutic benefit. It's easy to purely enjoy the experience of a psychedelic substance. But because I believe the integration to be the most important step in the therapeutic benefit, and I also believe that integration takes time, I don't believe you can do psychedelics every week or even really once a month and still experience the benefits. I've seen lots of people create just as toxic of cycles with psychedelics as any other substance, and still audacity to call it medicine. As with any medicine, psychedelic can be abused. It's just up to us to be honest and aware about the effects they're having in our life and weigh the impact they're creating. And for me personally, and it is a personal choice, but if I'm doing journeys more than a few times a year, it's time for me to take a step back and to make sure that the experience itself isn't what I'm seeking, as opposed to the benefits it can engender in me. Psychedelic can be such powerful tools for our own spiritual and emotional growth, but like any tool, they must be respected and used with intention to fill a higher purpose. The same hammer that can be used to build a house and a home can be used to tear it down. Respect, reverence, and work are all part of the path to building something new. There's no magic pill, no magic bullet, no substance, no workshop, no program that circumvents the work and the will. There are only tools, and it's up to us what we want to build with them. Thank you all so much for being here, sharing this with me tonight. It's been my honor to speak with you about my experience. Thank you.